Today on the program, Ukraine Today, photos of the Ukrainian cruise missile Barss have been published online. How Ukraine is countering the potential fleet of the Russian Federation? What is happening on and around the front lines at this very moment? What kind of assistance Ukraine will receive from Poland and the Czech Republic? Russia is preparing to attack NATO from the territory of Belarus. I have gathered for you the most important and significant news about Russia's war against Ukraine from the past week. My name is Julia Kort. Good evening. A mysterious beast that hunts the rear of the Russian Federation. For the first time, photos of the Ukrainian cruise missile Barss have been published online. The missile was presented at the Museum of the Russian-Ukrainian War at the National Defense University of Ukraine. This missile is designed with a wingspan of about 2 meters. At the same time, the jet engine is mounted on top and the body is made of composite material and consists of a small number of parts. The Barss missile drone is already a mass-produced item, which Ukraine can launch at Russia by the hundreds per day. The specifications of the Barss are not officially disclosed. Open sources have revealed the approximate flight range: 700 to 800 kilometers, and a warhead whose weight can reach several dozen kilograms. And now, here is our military overview of what is happening at the front and around it at this very moment.
The armed forces of Ukraine continue to systematically attack the Russian Federation. On the night of December 19th, new explosions thundered in several regions of the aggressor country at once. The Voronezh, Samara, Tula, Rostov and Oryol regions came under attack. These are regions that play a key role in supporting the Russian war machine. In Rostov-on-Don, after the nighttime strikes, part of the city was plunged into a blackout.
Just look at the view from the window. It's like a military town. Absolutely nothing. Nothing at all. No one. Even the entire military base was completely shut down. All the lights turned off.
Similar consequences were recorded in Oryol as well.
A missile just flew by.
Local residents reported 2 strikes in a row. The first hit the thermal power plant, the second struck the transformer equipment. As a result, part of the city was left without electricity. There was a threat of disruptions to heating and hot water. In the Samara region, the attacked Togliatti Azot plant is on fire, one of the largest chemical enterprises in Russia and a leading global producer of ammonia. It was loud as well in the temporarily occupied Crimea. Ukrainian forces delivered a powerful strike against Russian military infrastructure at the Belbek airfield. Using long-range drones from the Alpha Special Operations Center, the SBU disabled key elements of the enemy's air defense, causing damage worth hundreds of millions of dollars. 2 Nebo SVU long-range radar detection systems, a 92 N6 radar from the S-400 Triumph system, and a Pantsir S-2 surface-to-air missile system were hit.
When we talk about the destruction of any anti-aircraft installation, whether it's a surface-to-air missile system in this case, the Pantsir S-2, the modernized Pantsir S-2 system compared to the Pantsir S-1, meaning it can operate in in a wider range of weather conditions, let's put it that way. This is exactly the direction the modernization was aimed at. Radar stations are elements of air defense. They cannot be replaced and cannot be reattached quickly. In order to return them to the positions where they were stationed, you have to remove them from somewhere else. In any case, this weakens the air defense system, and in any case, it expands the opportunities for ground strikes.
In addition, a MiG-31 fighter with a full load of ammunition was hit.
The MiG-31 is no longer produced in Russia. It is a legacy of the Soviet Union. As of today, there is neither the expertise nor the capability in the Russian Federation to manufacture these fighters. What makes it notable is that it can be upgraded to carry the Kinzhal missile, an aeroballistic missile that very often flies over Ukrainian territory during large-scale attacks.
Meanwhile, the situation at the front remains tense. The enemy is not slowing down and is trying to seize even a centimeter of Ukrainian land.
At the same time, they are suffering greater losses even compared to the beginning of the month, which indicates increased efforts and accordingly a rise in casualties.
The enemy continues its assaults on several fronts at once, achieving local tactical advances but not a strategic breakthrough. According to Upstat data, Russian forces have advanced near the settlements of Dronivka, Nikonorivka and Pankivka in the Donetsk region. In addition, there has been recorded advancement of the occupiers in the area of Huliaipol in the Zaporizhzhia region. The Pokrovsk direction remains the hottest spot. According to the General Staff, over the past day, the Russian army attempted to break through the defenses of Ukrainian units 46 times. Thank you. The attacks took place in the areas of Krasny Lyman, Rodinsky, Mirnohrad, Kotlin, Udakny, Molodetsky filial, as well as towards Turetsky, Novi Shakovyi, and Novopavlivka.
The Russian Federation continues its unsuccessful attempts to encircle Pokrovsk and the Mirnohrad agglomeration, but for now they keep making these attempts. They want to break through to Hryshyn in order to close the ring of tactical and operational encirclement around the Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad agglomeration. This settlement is extremely important from a logistics standpoint for our troops defending Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad. At the same time, if Hryshyn falls, and the enemy is trying to break through there, so logistics will become extremely difficult on the Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad sections of the front. In addition, the enemy is trying to encircle along a smaller radius. Mirnohrad itself, the situation there is very difficult. We can see that the gray zone is almost surrounding Mirnohrad itself. And the gray zone means that if someone tries to break into the city, whether they want to enter or leave, they are forced to do so while fighting. So as of today, logistics in Mirnohrad rely mainly on the operation of drones, both ground and aerial.
Meanwhile, paratroopers from the 46th Separate Airmobile Podil Brigade of the Air Assault Forces, together with adjacent brigades, managed to destroy a mechanized column of occupiers that was advancing to storm the Pokrovsk direction. In the Lyman direction, Ukrainian defenders destroyed an entire regiment of Russians, thereby improving the tactical situation in the Lyman area. According to the military, the enemy is trying to enter the city. Fighters of the 3rd Army Corps, together with soldiers from the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, were able to achieve this thanks to successful assault operations. In this direction, the enemy has concentrated its main strike force, deploying the 20th Army. According to Ukrainian military personnel, the force ratio in certain areas reaches 1:6 and even 1:10 in favor of the enemy. And
both the Lyman direction and Siversk are all eastern gateways. The Slovyansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration. If we look at the map, we can see just how close these settlements are to Slovyansk, first and foremost to Slovyansk. And the capture of Slovyansk, Kramatorsk and Druzhkivka. This is the last major agglomeration in Donetsk region that is controlled by the Ukrainian armed forces, and it is one of the strategic objectives of the Russian Federation's offensive that it has launched.
The situation in Kupiansk-Kharkiv region is in favor of the Ukrainian armed forces. Enemy units numbering up to 200 occupiers have been trapped in the city. Fighting continues, but crucially, the enemy's logistics have essentially collapsed. All supply routes have been cut off, and the transfer of reinforcements is impossible. The military emphasizes that this is clear proof that the Russian army can and must be fought despite its numerical pressure. Ukrainian forces continue to hold strategic positions on the outskirts of Vovchansk, repelling enemy attempts to break through in key directions.
The Ukrainian Defense Forces
control the southern, eastern, and western outskirts of Vovchansk. Offensive operations are concluding in the settlement of Lymany, meaning a clearing operation is underway. The situation is difficult but fully under control. Despite the enemy's active assaults, they have not achieved any success. Overall, in the entire gray zone, our strike drones dominate both in the city and in the surrounding settlements. Fighting is ongoing, with constant assaults and shelling from the enemy using all available weapons. While heavy fighting continues at the front, the war is increasingly reaching deep into Russia's rear, where the question of its ability to continue its aggression is being decided. An oil tanker was attacked in the Rostov region. Valery Gorchakov. The vessel was located at the oil products transshipment terminal of the Novoshakhtinsk plant, one of the key elements of the southern logistics of Russia's fuel sector. According to Astra, after the strike, the tanker began to sink. The stern of the vessel was flooded almost up to the superstructure. The area was quickly cordoned off, and the tanker itself was surrounded by boom barriers in an attempt to contain a possible oil spill. The strike was not a pinpoint one, but systemic. The wheelhouse and the hull of the vessel were damaged. Holes appeared in the engine and steering compartments. A fire broke out. Valery Gorchakov is under sanctions from the US, the European Union, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Switzerland. According to the main intelligence directorate of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, the tanker was entering ports in the occupied territories, participating in logistics that support the Russian war machine.
The Security Service of Ukraine struck 2 Russian Su-27 aircraft with drones at the Belbek airfield in Crimea, which was annexed by Russia. One of them was fully armed and preparing for takeoff. The estimated value of the aircraft is about $70 million. This is already the second successful attack by the security service of Ukraine on the airfield in recent days. Ukraine has expanded the geography of applying the most effective pressure measures on the Russian shadow fleet, through which the Kremlin illegally profits. Money from oil. In the Mediterranean Sea, the tanker Kandil was successfully struck. The vessel, about 250 meters long, sails under the flag of Amman. The operation was carried out by the Alpha unit of the security service of Ukraine. Europe has found the funds to help Ukraine in its extremely difficult financial situation, 90 billion. This is not only direct assistance, but also a clear political signal to Russia and the United States. This shows that Ukraine's European partners believe in the Ukrainian government, rely on the armed forces of Ukraine, and will continue to provide support in the fight against Russian aggression, which now threatens the entire continent.
No betrayal after all. After many months of discussion, and in fact a late-night vote, European leaders finally decided to allocate funds to Ukraine.
Today, we approved a decision to provide Ukraine with 90 billion euros for the next 2 years.
I am very pleased to announce that we have done this. We have reached an agreement that will allow us to meet Ukraine's financial needs for the next 2 years.
At the same time, the original idea was to finance Ukraine using frozen Russian assets. However, in recent weeks, the number of skeptics regarding this solution has been growing. That is why the EU immediately prepared an alternative solution as well.
Right from the very start of the summit, there were two solutions on the table. The first solution was to take the frozen Russian assets and use them to provide a loan to Ukraine. But the solution that was adopted was to allocate these 90 billion, and this is a loan. From the European Union budget, that is most likely EU bonds will be issued or something like that. I don't know the exact mechanism. I can't describe it. I'm not an expert. And so the European Union will essentially give us this money as a loan.
Experts were quick to reassure everyone. The decision to provide a loan was dictated solely by Europe's unwillingness to waste time. Continuing to discuss the mechanism for seizing Russian assets threatened with simply leaving Ukraine without money for the coming year. At the same time, despite the term loan, analysts believe that Ukrainians will not actually have to repay it.
In other words, if Ukraine suddenly fails to repay the loan, the debt will be covered from the European Union budget. Apparently, Europe fully understands that it will later have to make a political decision to write off these debts, because it can't. A defender country cannot defend Europe on credit. This means that if there is no fairness in these relations between Europe and Ukraine, in the future Ukraine will have no motivation in the event of aggression against Europe to act symmetrically and help the European countries. We must be on equal terms. And
European leaders are increasingly demonstrating this understanding. Despite Ukraine not yet being a member of NATO or the EU, the West understands in the war against Russia, they are united with Ukraine. We
have a simple choice, either money today or blood tomorrow. I'm not just talking about Ukraine, I'm talking about Europe. And this is our decision. Ours alone.
At the same time, it is especially worth noting that Russia resisted such a decision as much as it could, up to and including its traditional methods, direct threats, against top officials of Belgium and Euroclear.
Russia resorts to outright blackmail, to direct aggression, now not only against the country itself, but even against individual officials of that country, the European Union and NATO. And notice, for some reason, everyone in Europe takes this for granted. That is, we're talking about an act of declaring war. Yes, maybe this kind of war, but it's still war. When officials of one state threaten officials of another state with murder.
Notably, after setting aside disagreements over the confiscation of Moscow's funds, the participants voted unanimously in favor of granting the loan. This means they even managed to convince Hungary and Slovakia.
Many believed that Hungary would definitely block this decision. Obviously, they found approaches to Orban, and the main thing is the financial aspect. We need to truly understand that an incredibly critically important point to grasp is that France and Germany are actively and unequivocally active supporters in their steadfast support of Ukraine. In fact, the main donors of the European Union are the countries on which the financing of these smaller countries like Hungary and Slovakia depends. When Friedrich Merz took office as the new chancellor, He already clearly hinted that if certain countries that actively undermine the essential European unity are persistently claiming significant European funds, he would indeed actively and thoroughly reconsider this particular policy.
Analysts believe this became a turning point in the issue of voting within the European Union. And now, by indefinitely freezing Russian assets and essentially giving themselves another 2 years to make a decision, the EU knows how to act against those who will resist the collective position.
As for the reparations loan and the confiscation of Russian funds, it is obvious that this process will proceed in parallel.
The fact that Europe managed to find leverage over individual countries is extremely important, especially in light of the prospects that will soon face the EU, experts say.
The realization that this is not Ukraine's war in Europe, but a war in Europe itself. On Ukrainian territory, this changes the context and the understanding of the zone of responsibility for European leaders.
And, as is already becoming clear, this responsibility is not only for financial well-being, but also for the outcome of the Russian-Ukrainian war. Therefore, the era of looking back at US decisions is over, and the time has come to act independently.
All Europeans understand that now there will be a new European Union without America. All European countries, with the exception of a few that have decided to pledge allegiance to America, like Italy, Hungary, well, just a few of them. All the rest have undoubtedly, in fact, de facto, let's put it this way, decided to create a new European Union with slightly different rules. And everything is moving in that direction, towards the creation of a European Union with different rules, in which, in particular, there will be more manageability during wartime. Because previously, it was assumed that America would be the one to fight and manage the war. But now it turns out that's not the case.
And the decision to allocate funds for Ukraine is perhaps the best demonstration that the West will stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. In practice, has it proven that it has learned? And in the future, it will continue to overcome its problems for our common good.
For us, it is important that the European Union fulfilled its commitments, which were not binding obligations. These were words, they were moral obligations, not physical ones. The European Union, roughly speaking, has confirmed these guarantees. This is very important for us as Ukraine.
The new Minister of Defense of the Czech Republic has extended the aid program for Ukraine until 2026. Jaromír Zuna stated that the Czech initiative for the procurement of ammunition for Ukraine program will continue to operate. He believes that the main issues for the Czech army remain air defense and fulfilling commitments within NATO. This is how he presented his priorities for the next 4 years. He also called Russia the aggressor, stating that Ukraine was attacked, and the future depends on them, specifically on how, including the Czech Republic, will continue to support it. At the beginning of 2024, the President of the Czech Republic, Petr Pavel, announced his intention to collect 800,000
artillery shells and deliver them for the needs of the armed forces of Ukraine. The first batch of ammunition had already arrived in Ukraine in the summer of 2024. The Czech leader believes that the Czech Republic cannot stop its shell initiative for Ukraine, as this would lead to serious consequences for all of Europe. NATO is already facing dark times soon. Russia is preparing to attack the alliance from the territory of Belarus. The Russian Minister of Defense has named exact dates, and Putin openly says that NATO is allegedly provoking. We will tell you next how Russia is preparing and whether NATO is ready for this. In the report, Russia is preparing to attack NATO and is preparing for this on the territory of Belarus. As Bundestag Deputy Roderich Kiesewetter stated, Russia has already deployed 2 army corps on the territory of Belarus to strike NATO countries.
Thanks to a war economy, Putin is training hundreds of thousands of soldiers who are not being used in Ukraine at all.
Even before the attack on Ukraine, Putin claimed that no one would do anything, that no one would attack anyone. The dictator also comments on the possibility of attacking NATO.
Well, does even one of you believe that Russia is preparing to attack NATO? What is this? Are we supposedly going to attack NATO, right? What kind of nonsense is this?
That's why, as experts say, you should take everything coming out of the Kremlin with a grain of salt and not listen to the words, but watch their actions.
First of all, drone flights. They are testing how Europe will respond to a drone attack. They enter airspace with airplanes, not for long, not for a significant amount of time, but they do enter. They have flown into Estonia, into Finland. Troop concentrations have increased. In any case, the number of Russian and Belarusian troops will increase.
Military exercises, increased budget for the Russian army, preparation of Russian legislation for martial law, and propaganda. Everything points to the fact that Putin is preparing for something bigger.
Remember what Peskov said. 2 days before the attack, this is Putin's advisor, 2 days before the start of the so-called special military operation. He said that no one was ever planning to attack 2 days before it began. So naturally, we can only analyze the signs of what might happen. But all European analysts, NATO countries, they all agree that if the Russians are going to start something, they most likely will. This military action could be against European countries, the Baltic countries, maybe Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, or possibly Finland. Well, Belarus will be limited, but if it's Lithuania and Poland, yes, most likely it will be them. There will be attacks from the side of Belarus, and, for example, Estonia borders the Russian Federation.
Ukrainian intelligence has repeatedly stated that Ukraine is only the first stage for Putin. Moreover, recently Putin has started personally blaming Europe for the war in Ukraine and publicly insulting Europeans.
It's not us. It was in 2022 that the war began. These are destructive forces in Ukraine, supported by the West. The West itself will come knocking. They unleashed this war. And the European piglets immediately joined in this extensive work of the previous American administration, eagerly hoping to greatly profit from the complete collapse of our country.
Lukashenko has also become bolder since the territory of his country serves as a staging ground. He stated that the continuation of the war in Ukraine, and he gave some advice to everyone living next to a sleeping.
Well, if you happen to live right next to this large sleeping bear, wake it up. Find a normal relationship so that...
Back in October, Finland's defense minister is building up its military power near the EU borders and is preparing for a even after the war in Ukraine ends. The minister noted the active modernization of the Russian army and the redeployment of units to the alliance's borders, which indicates the Kremlin's long-term aggressive intentions against Europe. And Bundestag member Kiesewetter states that in his opinion, we are referring to the specific calendar year 2026, a point in time that is approaching in the near future. This particular year, often anticipated with various expectations, marks a distinct period.
And the years 2026 and 2027 are projected to be profoundly critical and pivotal periods, marking significant junctures for various developments and decisions. All the experts are consistently saying the same thing across the board. This isn't just some academic paper, it's their commander, the chief of the general staff, who says that a hybrid war begins in such a way that neither the population nor the armed forces nor the leadership understand whether it's already a war or not yet a war. Most likely it will be some kind of little green men, some so-called people's self-defense groups somewhere in Estonia, and there will be other such actions.
Moreover, as Russian Defense Minister Belousov personally stated, this is supposedly the case. NATO is preparing for a military confrontation with Russia as early as the 2030s.
All this points to NATO preparing for a military confrontation with Russia.
This means that propaganda in Russia has already begun, and the Kremlin is trying to convince both Russians and the whole world that it wasn't them who started it, but Europe, and that Russia is supposedly being forced into it. It's exactly the same as before the start of the full-scale war in Ukraine. Previously, Europe didn't really believe in such a scenario, but the more they felt aggression on their own territories, the more they started to prepare. And they became afraid.
Europe is waking up. 4 years weren't enough. We were shouting at the top of our lungs saying, look, Russia won't stop, it will keep going further. But they really didn't want to come out from under the covers, like children who hide under a blanket when they're scared. Or, to use another comparison, like a warm bath. They didn't want to, now they do want to. Whether you want to or not, you have to do something, because the threat is already tangible, not just real. When you say it's real, a person doesn't feel it, they still don't understand. But when they start to understand, to feel that, now when it actually hits them, that's when it gets scary, and that's when action begins. Well, thank God at least they're starting to do something.
Europeans have already started to strengthen their defenses, allocating more budget to the military-industrial complex, preparing people for war. At the same time, they began to increase aid to Ukraine because they understand that Ukraine already knows how to fight and is a reliable shield for NATO. But even so, Europe still hopes that if peace is achieved in Ukraine, Putin won't go any further. The countries that border Russia are especially tense. Finland warns that Russia will move troops to NATO's borders even if a peace agreement is signed in Ukraine. Russia remains a threat. Finland has already hosted the first summit of 8 eastern flank countries that have a sea or land corridor with Russia and Belarus. For Europe, it is now important to be ready for self-defense as the US is beginning to withdraw from the continent. And the tense situation is only escalating.
That's all for today. I, Julia Kort, thank you for being with us. I read your comments and feel your support. Strength to the Ukrainian defenders, glory to Ukraine. Subscribe to our channel, give us a like, and see you next time.